Hey Amol, how are you doing today?
Hey Rahul, what's up? Nice to see you, man.
I like the billboard that you have right there. What does it say?
Your ad here. That's what I mean.
Awesome, awesome. So, all right, I guess we kind of gave it away. So, in today's version of this conversation between two friends, we're going to talk about ads. Ads are pretty much how the entire internet makes its money. Like we have the two biggest internet tech companies, Google and Facebook. A ton of their revenue basically just comes from ads, even though they have other slightly different businesses. Google more so than Facebook, even. Like ads are the lifeblood of this business. So it's kind of very interesting to learn more about ads, understand who the big players are, how they do things, and what does the next couple of years hold for us.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And it's interesting, right? Ads have changed so much. And, we remember brands through ads. If you remember Bajaj scooters, for example, and, Vico Vajradanti, all these are iconic brands, but they have a message to the audience. And that message is through ads.
You
And
know
we
the best ad that I've ever come across? It's the Zuzu ads by Vodafone during
Oh, yeah,
IPL.
yeah,
Those were
yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah, it was really innovative, and it came at a time when IPL was going on, and they they had eyeballs, and that's what ads are all about. The same thing in any form of media is there on the internet as well. And happy to dive in. I also remembered one quote as we're speaking, right? Ben Thompson of Stratechery says that advertising is the single most important business model for anything consumer on the internet.
That's
And
right.
there's nothing more stronger than those words there to define how ads have shaped the internet, how ads have shaped Google, Facebook, the most used uh, services on the internet even today. And seeing how they've grown is all because of ads. And we should dig deep into the history of ads and then come and speak about how ads have changed and what lies in the future.
Alrighty, take it away. So, like all of the different ads that you talked about, the Chetak ones, the Vodafone ones, are all TV ads. So,
Yeah.
what's the fundamental difference between an existing online ad that you might see on Google or Facebook to the ones right behind you on that billboard, or like TV ads? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah. So let's go back to the 20th century. Ads have existed forever. Brands, since the time brands have existed, and since the time that brands have wanted to go into uh, sales and marketing, ads have existed. That's been one strategy to reach out to consumers, to make them aware of the brand, to make them aware of the product, and to get them to buy. Essentially, that's why ads are there. They want Rahul to buy the Bajaj scooter at the end of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now, as I told you, ads have existed from the past. In the past, there was no internet or there were no computers or mobiles. So how did this work? We had newspapers, and newspapers carried ads. Newspapers' part income was from people like you and me who used to subscribe to it. It was little lesser than what they used to charge advertisers. Advertisers got real estate in the newspaper for showing their ad. And this is where publishers, for example, let's take the New York Times, the Washington Post, every publisher across the world had sold ads and they made money through that. And they had more power than ad agencies. Ad agencies are people who businesses used to go to, and these ad agencies had relationships with newspapers and they used to put ads on their behalf.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was traditional advertising. And suddenly with the internet, Yahoo and Google figured out that, hey, let's put banner ads like how they put on the newspaper onto the internet and see how we can make money, because these services are free. Facebook is free, Google is free. You don't pay to search. So they had to get a way to monetize, and ads was one of them. Very innovative. And essentially what happened was, when Google, Facebook, Yahoo got into ads, it just opened up this infinite inventory of ads and this huge network of people that they could target, right?
So
Because of
let's
that,
expand on that a little bit
yeah,
more, because I think you're making a very important point there, right?
yeah,
So when you were a New York Times or a Washington Post or Times of India, what have you, you had a certain set of subscribers. right? So like you, like these were people that you could reach through by building those distribution relationships and stuff like that. So you had some pan country or national newspapers. Then you had mostly regional newspapers. They all
Yeah,
had their own demographics, but fundamentally they were kind of restricted in terms of the amount of reach that they
exactly.
had, right?
Exactly.
And
They
that's a
knew who their
key
readers were.
distinction between
Yeah.
between display ads in like newspapers and even TV kind of worked the same way, because you had a couple of national networks and then you had regional channels,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
You had these brands kind of working through ad agencies to ensure that they were placing the right set of ads in the right amounts across all of these channels, so they can reach the right audience and the maximum spray of audience that they can.
Yeah.
How did Google fundamentally change that?
Yeah. So Google literally had this entire global audience, right? It had people from Southeast Asia, it had people from Europe, and it had people in the United States. And now businesses were not restricted by geography. So what it made is it made the cost of putting an ad out to literally zero, because they didn't have to depend on ad agencies who had, power structures and powers of corridor to like, hey, can you make this ad possible for me? Things like bidding and things like that were very manual and very hierarchical. That went off overnight. And the second thing was there was a distinction made now, right? Their potential customer, they had more ideas about them rather than just putting out an ad on a newspaper and expecting someone to buy their product. Now they had more information about who they were putting the ad out for.
Right. So in that world, in the offline world, right? So you'd see an ad, like you might see an ad for like, let's say a Chevy, but then
Yeah.
you go into a dealership and buy a Chevy or not. There was no way for anybody to kind of know that, hey, like you saw this ad actually worked. And as a result, you went ahead and bought a Chevy. I mean, buying a Chevy is not a very frequent thing, but you get the point, right? Whereas when kind of Google started kind of figuring out this entire internet ads ecosystem, they had one secret super weapon, right? Which was the fact that you had a box and you were telling that box exactly what you wanted, which is the fundamental phenomenal innovation that kind of happened, where you were then able to kind of take these ads and target and show things to people just based on the interest that they told you they had. You weren't guessing, you weren't figuring out that, hey, a person who reads this magazine is of a certain type. There's no Mad Men type stuff that's happening anymore, right? They're telling you, hey, here's what I want, and then you can use that information to target ads. And I think that was the fundamental innovation, because just opening up more inventory doesn't necessarily unlock anything, right? Because you might have 300 million people on one side. There are very few brands that actually need to be heard by so many different people. It's the fact that they were able to, Google was able to like open up this really large inventory and be able to target and restrict it, and at the same time make every single ad unit affordable. So like traditionally, like you might have only really large or medium-sized businesses who could have taken out an ad, but now more and more mom and pop shops can actually also sign up for Google Maps ads or regular Google ads, Yelp ads, and so on and so forth.
No, exactly. And you got that bang on. And one thing that you might want to highlight here is the attribution piece that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe go a little deeper into how Google finds out more about you and how they're targeting and helping all these small time vendors now versus in the past to really, really make Rahul, to make sure that Rahul is the person they want to target and to make sure that Rahul is the person they will sell the product to.
Right. So let's break down what attribution actually is. Right. So attribution, very simple. It basically means that, hey, you saw this ad and as a result, you made this purchase. Now so this purchase is attributed to this particular ad. Now, the reason why that's important is I can then kind of figure out, hey, is this ad actually working? Right?
Yeah.
Or should I try a different creative? Maybe I should sign up a different celebrity. Maybe I should try a different, text or copy, like things that we've come to kind of expect now normally, but then back in like the late 90s is kind of innovative, right? So like this whole concept of being able to like connect an ad to an actual purchase is basically what fundamentally changed internet, right? Because like you could, on Google, you would see a whole bunch of ads that different people were bidding against, right? Then you would select that ad and then probably go to a different website, maybe complete a purchase, maybe sign up for something. You were able to kind of close the loop there. Now, in order for Google to do that, right? One, they had the information that you were giving Google directly.
Yeah.
That is your keywords that you were putting in the search box.
Search. Yeah. When you're
But
searching, you're just typing in a query. That is the information they have about you.
exactly. And they also had some other metadata that they could get from your browser, right? So they could get things like, your location based on your IP address. You could figure out that, hey, like, this person was in Mountain View, that person was in Sunnyvale, and so on, right? But this is very basic kind of profile targeting. What Google did then was, in a bid to kind of expand, their their appeal to advertisers, they also launched this network called AdWords, which
Correct.
let everybody else on the internet also monetize, right? So like Google would go build these relationships with, advertisers, and then now those advertisers could advertise on Google, and they could also advertise on a whole third-party network of websites.
Yeah.
Now the second order effects of kind of building out this network to make it more appealing to their advertisers to say, hey, we have more reach than just our website, was the fact that then now Google could start tracking you across a whole bunch of different websites. So every time you landed on that website, they would Google, because you were signed into Google or because you were using the same browser, the same machine, they could tell that, hey, like Amol, went to the website of Salt and Straw, went to Yelp, did so many different things. And we actually think that based on our, genius scientists who've come up with some algorithms that, hey, like he's probably a 20-something who works in tech, so has a certain, median income. And so, hey, brands, here's how you can target Amol, right? And which is kind of like basically how this whole targeting became more and more sophisticated. So now, like as an advertiser, you have a lot of different levers and controls at your disposal to specifically create these audiences.
Yeah, man. And this is, I think, perfect for any advertiser. I know so much about these people who are in certain demographies and behave a certain way. But how do I pay Google or Facebook for these ads, right? So that's a big question. Previously, you had ad agencies, they used to say, okay, I'm going to put 10 ads. For 10 ads, I'm going to charge you X amount of dollars. It doesn't work like that in the internet when you have an information overload for every context of user, right? And you're going to pay for essentially for them to click the ad or for them to see the ad. So do you want to just dive into like, hey, what are display ads, what are search ads, and how Google innovated the pricing model around that, the cost?
Yeah, that's a fascinating topic as well, and I think that's kind of really where Google innovated, and that's the one piece of tech that they wrote that really fundamentally changed their trajectory as a company. Right. So let's talk about ads. Like in newspapers, again, to kind of go back to that analogy, right? So you would have like different, ads on different pages being priced differently because more and more people will kind of see it, right? Or the more people that could view it, or as impressions as they're called in the industry, right? The more you could charge. So that fundamental business model kind of carried over to the internet as well. So where there's something called cost per CPM, right?
Yep.
Basically, it's the cost for every 1,000 views. So every time a display ad or basically a banner ad, which is like a small box with a picture, might be a GIF with a bunch of text and images, right? That's a display ad, right? Not too different from like the banner that's behind you. Right? Every time that's viewed, every 1,000 times that's viewed on a website like that has that AdWords network or like the Facebook network or what have you, there's a certain cost for that the advertiser has to pay. Now, the innovation also happened on the attribution side, which is being able to like say, hey, this particular user clicked on this link and then ended up going and building out, ended up converting on the website. So they started creating a different business model around that. That's called CPC, or cost per click. So every time you show up an ad on Google search or on Facebook, like you don't pay for the view, you actually pay for the conversion, which ultimately is a lot more powerful than just being visible, right? Because it is intentionally driving action. So that's how an advertiser pays, Google or Facebook to show their ads. But that's just because you're willing to pay, doesn't mean that Google or Facebook will show their ads, because at the end of the day, like this is the money that they're making.
Yeah.
Right? They want to make as much money as possible, right? And when you're on their apps or on their websites, they're monetizing your attention. So Google kind of innovatively kind of came up with this process saying, hey, I have multiple different providers that want to show an ad for this particular keyword, right? And they didn't
Yeah.
know how to decide, right? So at some point, fundamentally, they had to figure out like, hey, who do we show? So they said, hey, let's make it an auction. Whoever kind of gives us potentially, the better rate, we'll kind of go after. And we're going to let them all bid amongst each other. Whoever comes up with the
Yeah.
second highest price is typically the one that we will, show for that particular keyword or for that particular issue. And so this is what is commonly called a second price auction. And this is
Yeah.
how typically most ad auctions are done, even to this day. So that was a fundamental
Exactly.
innovation in how the ad industry kind of evolved. And I
And
can link below to the Wikipedia article about second price auctions, which I find was a very fascinating concept. So it's like an
oh
economic
yeah,
concept where if you let the second highest price win, it actually incentivizes everybody else to bid what they would actually pay versus randomly jacking up the.
randomly.
It
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
normalizes it. So it's a very interesting concept.
No, economically it does make sense, right? And there's a lot of theory behind why second price auction is the most suited for any kind of bidding, right? Even if you take bidding on any other platform, let's take, you're bidding for a player or for a franchise that you own. Second price auction is what many sports strategists also recommend, which is really interesting. You mentioned about Facebook a lot in your previous conversations, and I know in our past conversations we have spoken about how Facebook innovated the social ad space, right? Facebook is a social network. They didn't have any money making strategy then, right? And then they acquired a few more apps like Instagram, WhatsApp, and core Facebook has always been ads, and they've figured out ads post 2010. Their story has been different from how Google figured out ads. And they have also been one of those pioneers in, hey, facebook.com, the web, and Facebook app, the app, how ads work in both these ecosystems. And Facebook has got a lot of claps of sorts for these mobile ads and for these web-based ad network. I remember you telling me about a memo that you read about FBX, the Facebook Exchange, and the Facebook
Mhm.
Audience Network, right? There was, internally how their schools of thought were different, yet
Mhm.
they came up with products to support ad agencies and publishers to publish ads for people on Facebook. And it makes sense, right? Facebook today they have almost more than 2 billion people, but at that
Yeah.
time they had a few million. And to come up with a scalable ad model is really hard. And especially Instagram, when it was bought by Facebook, they had no monetization strategy, but yet they had to come up with a framework to show ads. How did they come up with it? And there have been things like, hey, do something that doesn't scale, do something manually, see how
Mhm.
traditionally ads have worked. Like the auction, for example, is how in the past people used to go to newspapers and say, hey, I'm going to pay $10 for this ad, and another guy used to shout, right? How that got digitized is so fascinating. You want to talk about the Instagram and Facebook ad network?
Yeah. I think before we jump into Facebook and Instagram in particular, I think what's interesting is to understand the differences between like a desktop ad unit and a
Yeah,
mobile ad unit, right? So
yeah,
let's start there. So fundamentally, like if you think about it, like it is still even to this date, right, still kind of easier for you to transact on the web
correct.
than it is on mobile, right? So because you have access to a full desktop browser, right?
Yeah.
So you can tailor the experience much better, right? Typically, all of your payment credentials are stored in your browser. You might even be signed in, so it's very easy for you to kind of go.
Yeah, it's easy to keep cards on file. You already have a relationship from the beginning with your Chrome
Exactly.
browser or your Safari.
Exactly. So versus like say a mobile unit, mobile ad, where if you were to click on a link, it typically opens up in like a janky browser, like back in 2012 when things weren't really the best quality.
Opera was the most advanced mobile browser in 2010, 2011, right?
Right.
And the
Exactly.
major problem with mobile browsers was the real estate, right? You don't have as much real estate as your 13-inch laptop or a 15-inch laptop.
Exactly.
And it becomes so hard at that stage. And people just stopped using browsers and went to apps.
Right, exactly.
on mobile.
So you didn't have enough real estate to actually show the same number of display ads. So your CPMs on mobile were low. The
Yeah.
second thing is you weren't able to like actually create a friction-free kind of experience. So even if a user clicks on a link, like I would open up in a mobile app where like transaction rates were traditionally low. I mean, things have come a long way in the last
Oh
8 years,
yeah.
but that's kind of
Totally.
how
Yeah.
things work. And Facebook at this time was also kind of going through this internal reckoning of moving away from Facebook.com and desktop site to their mobile app. So that was another big kind of transition that they had to make because a lot more people were spending their free time on the Facebook app versus that. And they need to kind of figure out a monetization story, there.
It's
On top of all of
fascinating,
this,
Rahul. The time spent that you mentioned, right? I was looking at it, right? Let's talk about web. On web, people spend about an hour or two every day. And this is on average around the world. On a mobile web, the maximum tolerance that a human has is just 30 minutes. Whereas on the Facebook family of apps, the time spent across Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook today is 3 hours every day. So look at the time spent there, and that was their mobile strategy.
right, and exactly, and they had to kind of pivot the entire company, and there are fascinating stories about how they kind of pulled that off because they had to retool the entire engineering team.
Yeah,
So the other kind of dimension to this entire kind of Facebook ad monetization conundrum was the fact that there are two types of broad ads, right? There's brand ads, right, and there's performance ads. So brand ads are
correct.
like display ads, like the ones that you see on TV during Super Bowl, right? So they typically tend to like kind of like they're aspirational. They're trying to like create these things, try to create like this desire to buy within a particular user, and then the monetization or the actual action doesn't happen until much later. So car
Correct.
dealerships are like a very fun, quintessential example of this. Like you might
Yeah,
see car
right.
ads all the time, but nobody's ever in the market of buying a car all the time either, right? So
Yeah,
they're trying to like inspire this desire in you. And on the other hand, you have these performance ads where it's very targeted, very specific. You can complete the action right then and there.
correct.
Now, brand ads, because people are willing to wait for monetization a little bit more, right? Tend to be monetizable at a much higher rate than
Correct.
cost per click ads or performance ads, right?
Yeah,
So that was
yeah,
another big debate that Facebook was having internally. So you had the shift to mobile, right? The second dimension was mobile ads, especially click-based ads weren't necessarily performing extremely well. And then on the
correct.
top of it, the brand ads can be monetized significantly higher than performance ads. So like all of these
Yeah,
things were trying to like what are the decisions or the levers of the decisions that the execs at Facebook were making. So
yeah,
internally, they were debating between two concepts. One was a Facebook exchange, right,
yeah,
which was led by this dude called Antonio Garcia Martinez. If you do not
yeah,
follow him on Twitter, PSA, please follow him on Twitter. He is hilarious. Like his tweets are wild as fuck, right?
yeah.
And like I love following him on Twitter, so you should just do that. I'll link him in the description below. But like he was leading this real-time exchange, much like Google's auctions, where like
Correct.
every time you would open up the Facebook app, right, like there would be a small portion of the news feed that they would auction on the service, right? One of the
Correct.
key decisions that Facebook Exchange kind of made was instead of relying on proprietary Facebook data, they let advertisers also upload other tracking information about you, right? So
Yeah,
things like, I know this feels a little cringy, but things like Target could upload data about you, about your past purchases, things that you've done with your credit cards. Anything that you use a credit card for
exactly.
is
All third
publicly
party.
available
Yeah,
for people to buy. So like they were so Facebook Exchange, being the real-time auction engine that it was, let these brands upload all of this data so that they can kind of comprehensively bid on only the users that they really wanted to. On the other side, right, so which basically meant that it would be like the perfect kind of hotbed for performance type of ads. On the other
exactly.
side, you had a whole bunch of other kind of Facebook product managers who were trying to kind of decide if we should kind of go after the brand targeting market, so or the brand ads market, right? And these people were kind of thinking about more about using Facebook's proprietary data about the location that you say you're at, the location that from signals from the app itself, who you interact with, things that you say you like on Facebook pages, for
Exactly
example.
what you like, what you share, and they also had more than 4 or 5 million pages at that point of time
Right.
who were ready to show ads.
Right. Exactly. And so it's like one of those things where they were trying to decide between like this performance ads based system and then this brand ads based system based on proprietary data. And we found, so Sriram Krishnan, again, from past Twitter and Snap fame, has like this amazing section of memos on his website. So
Yeah,
I'll link to that below. One of the memos that, that he links there is how Facebook execs like Andrew Bosworth specifically was outlining a decision-making framework between, Facebook Audience Network, which is the brand ads section, and Facebook Exchange, and which is a very interesting kind of decision-making framework. They talked about how Facebook Audience Network was underinvested in up until that point. They needed to kind of shore up investment in that, but then it would have the much higher payoff because you could charge a lot more money for monetizing brand ads than display ads. This also kind of took away the whole debate of how do you monetize mobile if clicks and the entire deep linking and
exactly.
conversion of purchases is not really figured out, right?
Yeah,
So they were trying to kind of address all of these things in one stroke. The beauty of it is Facebook typically works really, really well for brand advertising because you have this infinite scrollable news feed where there are things that catch your attention. You have videos, and Facebook really innovated on like the ad unit format, right? So they had these
correct.
amazing immersive ads. They now have like 360-degree ads and so on and so forth, right? Which is kind of very, very fascinating. And so they buckle down. They kind of chose the Facebook Audience Network route and double down on it. And now that's the second biggest ad network. I actually don't know which one is bigger, Google or Facebook, but
I think
these two together
Facebook is the biggest. Yeah,
have
because of the
nearly
fact that
70% of market share.
yeah. No, I think Google's is bigger. Sorry to have interrupted you there. It's because I was just reading not last quarter, but last year's revenue, 2019, from Facebook for ads, I think was upwards of 100 billion,
Right.
right? So, and Audience Network also is fascinating because of the fact that it not only was built on proprietary data of Facebook, but Facebook family of apps, which is your Instagram.
Right.
This is the classic case where you're thinking or you're talking about or you're searching about a trip to New York City and you want to take a helicopter ride. You probably will see that ad on Instagram more than Facebook because Instagram they know more about you. They know you're going to be in New York City. You're going to post a story, and it's easier to target you on Instagram and get you converted for a helicopter ride, right? For example.
Right, right. And it's kind of very interesting to see like how that kind of works. So one of the things that kind of happened is because of Facebook having this audience network and Facebook's apps kind of being the primary destination for many users on their mobile phones, and
Yeah.
Google on the desktop, and even on more recently on the mobile side with the Android acquisition, right, being where most people spend their time as well. Right? These two became the dominant two digital ad networks, and it
Correct.
makes and that makes life a lot more easier for brands as well, because earlier they would have to go to these ad agencies. Now they can transact with two platforms directly. And
Correct.
the unforeseen consequence of something like that is any new consumer app tends to have an upward struggle now to monetize because they have to create their own ad network. And marketers tend to find it less effective and less performant than just investing all of their dollars on Google and Facebook's ad networks. And this is a perennial challenge that Snap has had for a long time.
Snapchat and TikTok, they've not been able to monetize as much as Facebook or Google because of the fact that they're only mobile. And the second is mobile is hard, right?
Right.
Because of the fact that Facebook Audience Network has so much information already, and the time spent by more than upwards of 2.5 billion people across these platforms is on these apps.
Right, exactly. And the other interesting thing is like when you spend money on Google, you're spending money on Google plus YouTube plus a whole bunch of other high traffic sites, right?
Correct.
And on Facebook, you're spending money on the Facebook app, you're spending money on Instagram, and then potentially WhatsApp and a couple of other things that they might go by in the future as well. So like between these two different networks, you can reach about 4 billion people amongst a 7 billion planet. So that makes a ton of sense that the majority of digital spend is kind of consolidated there. What I found
Yeah.
interesting while we were doing this research was when Instagram made the decision to kind of turn on ads. Instagram's founders, Kevin Systrom, right, was um, so worried about the effect that ads would have on the Instagram community. They're a very, very community-driven type
Yes.
founder, that he would manually approve every single ad that would be put on the system, right?
Yeah, and this is a great segue as well, right? For if you've seen this podcast of Reid Hoffman's Must Scale,
Maslow's scale.
which is a great breakdown podcast for a lot of products and a lot of companies and their founding principles. It shows how Kevin thought about making the Instagram product, and this podcast episode especially talks about this, right? How Kevin himself used to sit all night to approve ads or disapprove ads, and
Right.
that's a interesting thing. Just wanted to get in. But yeah, as you mentioned, how ads have evolved, there are some places where people have found it hard to even monetize using ads. One of them is WhatsApp, right?
Mm-hmm.
WhatsApp is publicly, they've been telling for a few years since acquisition that, hey, we want to monetize WhatsApp, but what's the ploy? Like, are they going to ask users to pay? That's probably going to be hard to do today, because of the fact that people expect WhatsApp to be a free service. It's not a Slack or a Teams like ploy where people can pay for chatting. There are so many other alternatives existing today, Hike, Telegram, and then you have WeChat, which has become so big in China, right? You still have uh, those platforms where they can move to. So the substitution cost is not too high for them to move. So what does WhatsApp do? And one of the things that they have spoken about is ads. But if you look at how WhatsApp works, the identity of a user on WhatsApp versus Facebook or Google is so very different, right? The identity of a person or a user on WhatsApp is based on her or his mobile phone number, which is geographically restricted, which is restricted by network as well. And it is also restricted to only the contacts on the phone, right? So the data that WhatsApp gets is with respect to, hey, the chat data, hey, they have the mobile phone number data saying who this user is, where do they stay, they have all that data. And it's not an easy thing to link with the other Facebook family of apps on a very basic level. But definitely there are, we've spoken about it, there are mechanisms where WhatsApp can get data about that person just based on their phone number, because there are so many third-party data providers and contextual providers.
And recently, I think they updated the terms of service as well to start sharing more data with Facebook as well. So like they were able to kind of link the number that you used with Facebook to the WhatsApp number, so that they can start using the same ad network. Basically, turn on the giant Facebook ad machine.
Exactly.
I think the biggest challenge with monetizing WhatsApp the way it is right now is the fact that over time, you've seen that ads have become more and more intrusive, right? So like if you think about it, so on desktop, you first started with like simple text-based ads that Google would show you. Then we started seeing that like that was novel. People used it for like a little bit. Then people started developing blindness to it. Then you started seeing these display ads, these banner ads, these giant flashing beacons of red that were trying to get your attention. And then people did user studies, and they would see that their eyes would just not even pay attention to that over a period of time. Then you came to mobile, right, where your session times, you had a lot of time spent, but then your sessions were very, very small. You'd spend like 2 minutes while you're in the line waiting for something, looking for mobile, right? So there are only so many ads that you can show, right, as a result. And then you have videos where if you wait, or if you have a 2-minute ad before a 10-minute video, like especially on YouTube, nobody's going to watch that. Like, which is why this.
When was the last time you did not skip an ad? That's a question that I wanted to ask you, right? So when was the last time you did not skip an ad? Very interesting. And
right. So when you kind of dial it down, right now a majority of that time spent is actually in messaging apps like apps like Messenger, like or Instagram DM, even within Instagram, right? And now WhatsApp. And the challenge with monetizing these directly through ads is the fact that like WhatsApp feels much more personal, right? Like because you open it with a very high intent to message somebody or to read a message. And
Yeah.
imagine seeing amongst your mom, your friends, and your sister and your brothers, right, a random ad from a brand, right? That
Yeah.
feels kind of intrusive. That feels, feels interruptive to the entire user experience, which is also one of those challenges that they have to go figure out and solve more broadly.
No, absolutely. And Facebook gives importance to user experience so much that I'm sure that you're not going to get ads between your chats, right? They are thinking of other ways, right? For example, there's really nice Messenger memo
Mm-hmm.
on using Messenger for businesses
Mm-hmm.
to target consumers like you and me, and
Right.
how we can have conversations on the Messenger bot, and yet they can use that to show inline ads, for example, based on, say, hey, if I'm talking to Dunkin Donuts, probably when I'm talking to Dunkin Donuts, I get an ad of, say, Krispy Kreme, right?
Right.
Things like that. So they have to get innovative there. They will get innovative there, uh, and get out an
And
ad
one
strategy.
of the other things that really stood out to me from that memo was how Mark Zuckerberg talks about uh, the traditional notion that hey, like messaging apps would monetize through payments, right?
Oh
And
yeah, yeah.
he kind of poo-poos that argument, like, of course, in a much more polished way because it's a business memo. But his kind of whole argument there, which really resonated with me, was payments and transactions, right? Are do not let you discriminate, price wise, right? So you might be having a high value transaction or low value transaction.
Yeah.
You have to charge the same level of rates for, facilitating that payment. They do not afford price discrimination to you. The second is you're leaving a lot of value on the table because you cannot capture any of the actual transaction value itself because you're not facilitating any of it beyond just the payments layer. And I found those two kind of, arguments kind of very interesting, that hey, like you could monetize Messenger by making payments kind of easy, but then
Exactly.
like that by itself is not sufficient. And he actually talks about it being a necessary but not sufficient condition, where he says if you make the friction of transactions kind of go away, then
Yeah.
that could give more incentive for businesses to advertise on Messenger directly, and then maybe kind of drive the more performance based ads that we haven't seen necessarily work very well on mobile.
No, absolutely. And as to your point, I think that's one of the most well written PRD of sorts, for any PM to look at. We should put that in the description as well. I know that we're running out of time. So the next and last topic that we should discuss is, hey, ads are annoying, right? So how do we are we going to get rid of ads? I don't think so. But how are new ways of ad monetizations happening? What are some of the challenges? Especially, in audio formats, in video formats. Audio is gaining more traction because people are listening to more podcasts. People are getting devices like, the Google Home Mini, Alexa, the Echo. So would you want to talk about that?
Yeah, no, that's a great kind of segue into this, right? So so let's talk about the two new big platforms that have come about, which haven't been monetized at the same level, or monetization is kind of very fragmented, right? So one is podcasting. So
Yeah.
I know we're doing a video podcast. We'll probably at some point make it audio only, right? But podcasting is like a fundamental, you know, uh, platform where it feels very archaic, right? So the ads still kind of feel very radio-based ads, right? So like you have the podcast host kind of, read out a particular thing. Like if you and I have a charity that we want to donate to, like I'll read out the message before the next podcast, and that's pretty much it. Like so everybody sees the same exact ad, same exact way. One
Irrespective of geography, irrespective of
exactly.
demography, irrespective of who they are and what age they are, right?
Exactly. And the second big aspect with podcasts as well is you and I can listen to podcasts across so many different platforms,
Yeah.
right? So some people use Spotify, some people use Apple Podcasts, some use Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Overcast. There's so many different kind of
Yeah.
players out there, right? And each one of them does, attribution and tracking
Yeah.
and metrics and data so differently that it's very hard for a creator who's hosting a podcast to actually give meaningful data back to their advertisers about the performance of their ads, right?
Correct.
And if there's one fundamental change that Google and Facebook have ushered into the advertising industry, is like now every marketer has to be a performance marketer. They have
Yeah,
to be data driven. They have to know
exactly.
the return on advertising
And
spend
it has
on
opened
past.
up a whole new industry for people to charge people on, hey, how do you do ads better, right? So
Exactly. And there's a whole SaaS industry that supports people who want to make ads better. There's like
yeah,
it's an entire ads mafia that happens, right? As a result. So the challenges are like people have come to expect, this very data driven way of kind of thinking about how they run campaigns and how they're effective with their advertising dollars. And podcasting hasn't necessarily, reached there, just in terms of being able to create those ad units. Like creating an
correct.
audio ad is much harder. You need jingles, you need more things to capture attention, and secondly also to measure the effective advertising spend, right?
Yeah.
I
And it is
almost kind of
just so hard. It is just so hard. Like, how do I know? Like on the web, the user flow is very linear, right? Here, it's not. Like, how do you know that? Hey, I went on Spotify, I saw this ad, and I went on the browser probably 2 days later, and I typed that website from that podcast ad that I listened to. So attribution gets really, really hard there.
Yeah, I think referral codes are one way that people are trying to solve it. But then, like, when was the last time that you remembered a referral code from a podcast and went,
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
right? So there's a lot to be solved there. And one thing that kind of came to mind when I was thinking about this was like how Twitter had a very similar problem when it came to monetization as well. They had so many different third-party apps that could also read Twitter with their own kind of take, right? They pride themselves on being an open platform. And one of the things that they realized when they had to start monetizing and they were under pressure from investors is the fact that they cannot monetize very well across a fragmented ecosystem, right? So they had to consolidate a whole bunch of these things into
One
two
day I
apps. They bought TweetDeck
could
and then they cut off API access to every third-party app that was building a Twitter reader to
check.
just the main app, so that they could actually consolidate and actually do ads the right way within their main app, right? And that's something that I'm starting to see, Spotify do in the podcasting space, right? So they're trying to consolidate, make it, a clear place for podcasts to thrive. So they have, tools for creators people like Jason Calacanis and all of those people who create podcasts all the time to create and get your podcast up in
Yep.
onto their
They
service
also
and
follow.
broadly everywhere as well. And then because they own the delivery mechanism to about 200 300 million odd subscribers, right?
Yeah.
They can also do some of these things like dynamic ads, demand driven ads, also use some of the proprietary data that they have on their platform, or join it from other different sources to do some of that advanced targeting that we've talked about earlier.
Yeah. One of the things they bought was Anchor FM earlier
Right.
last year for this very specific reason. Another interesting ad format is in assistants, that is your Home Mini and Alexa. One of the things is, it's a very conversational uh, tool that you use. You only, when you have a question, you speak to those uh, devices and you get your answers. And
I see
for
you're trying very
very,
hard to say or to avoid saying "Hey Google," but I think,
yeah,
and there you go. My
that's
phone just
correct.
went off.
Yeah, I was trying hard to avoid that. But yeah, no, what I was trying to say is that these devices have known to be intrusive in the past, right? You know, there have been privacy escalations by a lot of people, a lot of blog posts and researchers have written about it. Ads is one of the things that they don't do very well. It's hard to, again, attribution is a problem. And then the second thing is, hey, which ad do we show? Like, which is a profile? How do we identify which user is this? Because usually have one device for the house, but all there are like probably 5 6 users, all of them use Google. How do I know who's who? Right? So identifying the person, showing the ads there. So those are some interesting challenges you will see that are
The
being
second
solved.
is, imagine it'll be so awkward to introduce like an ad in between, right?
Oh
So I remember the story when I think it was Alexa or Google Home or what have you. There was some voice assistant that plugged in a Disney movie, and there wasn't even an ad. I think it was probably some ML feature that was trying to say, "Hey, I noticed that you like this movie. You should probably watch this as well." And
oh
people
wow.
freaked out all over about the fact that it was an ad and about the fact that it felt very intrusive. Like, imagine having some ads kind of blaring through a speaker in your house, and you have basically little to no control about it, and that tends to like rile a lot of different people up.
It
but
does it.
but Yeah, having said that, I think Amazon has probably the clearest, easiest path to monetization. They run the world's, or at least one of the US's biggest shopping,
Yeah.
websites and e-commerce sites. So like they have at least an indirect path to monetization. They've been trying to make voice shopping a thing. We tried ordering a bunch of things, but my roommate would always cancel right after. But yeah, they're trying very hard to kind of monetize that channel. I'm starting to see like Apple and Google kind of monetize through home automation type of devices. Kind of use Google
Yeah,
Home.
that was the
That's
Nest
like
acquisition all about, right? So
exactly
that's
try
an
to use
interesting.
that. So we'll see how whether ads actually make it onto these types of devices, and if so, it should be a very very clever, nifty, game changing format. We
Yeah,
haven't
man.
seen that in a while.
Yeah, and honestly, this was great discussion, and your insights into ads was really valuable. And if people have any questions, they should definitely reach out to you on Twitter and talk to you about it.
Alrighty. All right. Until next time then.
Yeah. See ya.